How's everybody doing today? My name is Paul, and I just want to say thank you so much for joining in for today's devotional. We are in a series called Famous Last Words, and excited to continue this on. In Luke chapter 24, this is on a Sunday, Jesus has risen from the grave, and he sees two of his followers going along a path, and they are discussing some pretty important topics, and Jesus walks upon them, and the Bible tells us that God was able to keep them from recognizing that it was Jesus. And so Jesus asked them, hey, what are you so intently discussing? And then they begin to tell him they say, we're actually talking about who Jesus was and who this group of people thought he was and what we thought he was and what the prophets said. And in this moment, they can't tell that it's Jesus. And Jesus, imagine you die, you placed in a tomb, you raise 3 days later, and you still rise from the grave, and people are asking who you are. Now, they can't recognize them, and in this moment, Jesus gets a little frustrated. And so he says this in Luke chapter 24, verse 25. He says, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory?" And then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Right there in this passage, we see in one verse two very present words. We see that Jesus says, wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer? That's the first word. All these things before entering his glory. That's the second word. We see suffering and we see glory in the same verse, in the same sentence. Now, if you're like me, in the last couple of months, I have been reluctant to hop on social media. I've been reluctant to honestly check the news. I haven't paid much attention because honestly, when I get on social media, when I check the news, I've just began to get discouraged. To be honest with you, I've become a little discouraged with what's going around the world, from natural disasters to shootings to political debates to all these different things that can be so weighty and so pressing. And I've kind of pushed it to the side because it's caused me to go, God, do you see everything that's going on? I know you do, Lord, but why is all this suffering continuing to happen? And so for me, I don't really like to get on the news or check social media. But then I think back to this verse, that Jesus would suffer before he would enter into his glory. That suffering and glory go hand in hand. They pair together. And it makes me think of John 16:33, where Jesus says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Jesus himself is speaking and he says, hey, here's a promise. You're going to have trouble. You're going to suffer. There's going to be things you go through. Just because you say yes to Jesus doesn't mean you have a life absent of trouble or suffering. It just now means in the middle of all that trouble and suffering, now you have the promise of him being present. In me, you will have peace. He says, you're going to have trouble. But the second promise there is he goes, hey, it's all right. I have overcome the world. Paul hasn't overcome the world. You haven't overcome the world. The president hasn't overcome the world. Jesus, the one who died for the world, has overcome the world. And then it gets me thinking about the world. Lord, how long will I be here? How long will this suffering last? And then it makes me be so thankful and grateful for Hebrews chapter 13, verses 14 and 15. It says, for this world is not our permanent home. Thank you, Lord. We are looking forward to a home yet to come, and that's talking about heaven. Therefore, let us offer through Jesus a continual sacrifice of praise to God, proclaiming our allegiance to his name. The hope is heaven. The reality is that even though you may be in this chapter of your life, there will be a chapter that is no longer temporary, but it is eternal. That we're looking forward to heaven, but we cannot escape the suffering that we may endure now. So I'm not trying to suppress or push away the things that you're walking through. What I'm trying to tell you is this one thing right here. If you can remember anything from today, is this right here, is that suffering is temporary, but glory is eternal. So I want to encourage you that just because you may be suffering, don't forget the promise of Luke 24, that right before the glory is the suffering. So keep on praying, keep believing God for the best. We'll see you back here tomorrow.